2023 is coming to an end, and that means it's time to take a look back at the media I've consumed over the year and determine which projects are the best and which ones are, well, not the best. Today, we will be focusing on the movies and placing each title I have seen onto a tier list. If you take a look, you can see the tiers that these movies will be sorted into. At the top is, of course, my top 10 movies of the year. Just below that is a tier for the movies that I would highly recommend to anyone. The movies that I really enjoyed, but for whatever reason they just barely miss out on reaching the heights of the top 10. This is followed by the background noise tier, which is reserved for those movies that are easy to have playing on the TV while you might have your focus elsewhere. The movies that are overall fine, but there may not be anything really special about them. Next, we have the disappointing tier, which is for those movies that I was expecting just a little more from. These movies are not exactly bad, but they simply fell short of what I was looking for from them. After that, we have the so bad it's good tier. And for those that know me, you may know that I have a strange attachment to bad movies. In the world exist some movies that you might enjoy watching, but at the same time, you would never feel comfortable recommending the movie to another person. Finally, we have the worst movies of the year, which will fall into the just bad tier. These are the movies that even I might refuse to watch again. Before we dive into the movies, I want to make it clear that everything I say in this video is going to be based on my own personal opinion, and the way the movies are ranked will be based upon my own experience with them. These are not what I consider to be objectively the best movies of the year. They are my personal favorite movies of the year, although there may be some overlap between those two things. Also important to keep in mind is that with my busy schedule throughout the year, I have not been able to see every movie released in 2023, and so there will be some notable titles missing from this video. Some are movies that I may not have had a big drive to see, and some may be movies that I simply have not had time to watch yet. I will say though, that my top 10 would most likely not change all that much, even with these movies being added into the mix. The only exceptions that I actually think might make that leap would be The Holdovers, American Fiction, The Boy and the Heron, and Killers of the Flower Moon. With that said, we have a lot to get through, so let's begin. The best place to start is at the bottom, so let's start with the just bad tier. This can also be considered the bottom 10 movies of the year, so to keep the suspense, let's do this tier in reverse order from the best to the worst, starting with May December, which is about an actress doing research for her role in what seems to be a Lifetime-style movie based on a notorious tabloid romance. Surprisingly, this is not the only movie of the year that features a story with a focus on grooming, but it is absolutely the most uncomfortable. My main complaint is that the movie is just too long, with most of the scenes feeling redundant. By the halfway mark, I was screaming at the screen, "I get it! Everyone is messed up!" Admittedly, this movie does feature fantastic performances from Natalie Portman, Julianne Moore, and Charles Melton, but unfortunately the end product just feels so tedious. I was honestly unaware that Family Switch was a Christmas movie, and once I was made aware during the opening scene that this was the case, it put me in a bit of a sour mood. So this placement is absolutely tainted by that one moment in my viewing. Even without that bad introduction, the movie never feels like it does anything that makes it feel like it deserved the green light. While not every movie needs to reinvent the wheel, it is usually beneficial to give a reason for why a viewer would choose that movie in question over something else. Family Switch is just a Christmas version of the Freaky Friday body swap formula, but the problem is that Freaky Friday is just infinitely more memorable and more fun, while Family Switch has maybe one joke about Maroon 5 that made me chuckle, not because it was funny, but because it was unexpected. This is just another title to be buried in the Netflix library, never to be thought of again. To its credit though, this is not the worst family movie of the year. Spy Kids Armageddon is somehow even worse than I expected it to be, which is quite a feat seeing as how even the original Spy Kids movie, which I do enjoy, set an extremely low bar. The main difference between this attempted reboot and the original is that the original is carried by the charisma of its cast. Zachary Levi is no Antonio Banderas, Gina Rodriguez is no Carla Gugino, and Billy Magnuson is no Alan Cumming. Even the child actors back in the original were at least competent and charming enough to carry the weight of that movie. While here, it seems as if there was absolutely no acting coach on set. This is not the fault of the children. I don't blame child actors for being child actors. The blame falls on the director Robert Rodriguez. Even stepping away from the acting in the movie, this story makes little to no sense, and the effects in the movie look so unappealing that I honestly had trouble keeping my eyes on the screen for more than 10-second chunks. Another Netflix fail. I think I can just group the next two together to save on time. The hatchet-wielding hitchhiker and Money Shot the Pornhub Story are two Netflix documentaries that fall comfortably into the bottom of the list. If you've watched my last video in which I ranked TV shows from 2023, then you know exactly what I'm about to say here. These movies do nothing more than show the audience facts from a real-life event and include interviews with people involved. There is no new information to provide new context, and there is no actual point or greater message to these stories. Just more low-effort Netflix algorithm fodder. Speaking of Netflix fodder, we have probably the most wasted potential of the year. The Killer is directed by David Fincher, and features performances by both Michael Fassbender and Tilda Swinton. It is a thriller about an assassin being targeted by his employers. This movie should have been an easy win, but it is so boring that I started to catch myself dozing off and had to go back to re-watch the piece I had missed. I never fall asleep during a new movie, and somehow this one knocked me out. Even so, it somehow is not the worst Netflix movie of the year. That honor goes to Chupa. I honestly have no idea what to say about this movie. An attempt at an E.T. style story about a group of kids finding a chupacabra, and it fails to do anything fun with that concept. This is a movie that kids will find too boring and adults will find too childish. The good news is that there's really nothing else I can say about it. It somehow manages to be more nothing than any other movie this year. At least it didn't make me actively angry like the last three entries into this tier. I think it's time to talk about The Flash. On a technical level, the hate for this movie was overblown. The CGI is absolutely awful, and honestly, if the director's defense is to say it's bad on purpose, then that's just admitting that it is in fact bad, so it ends up not really being much of a defense. Having said that, the story is not awful. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the story is anything groundbreaking, but it is a serviceable story for a superhero movie. The performances from Ezra Miller and Michael Keaton are also largely fine. If I were to give this a rating just based on the quality of the movie as a whole, I would place it at a very middle of the road 5 out of 10. The reason for its appearance in my bottom 3 is for some of the other choices that were made. An over-reliance on cameos hurts this movie, and setting up for a sequel that the audience knew ahead of time we were never going to see makes it feel like a complete waste of time. There is an attempt at a lesson for the main character of Barry Allen, but the movie ends with the character ignoring that lesson completely and trying to alter time anyways. However, there is one scene in this movie that places it down here. In the climax of the movie, there was a decision made to include CGI deepfakes of actors both living and dead. The disgust I felt that this movie includes an image of an actor who committed suicide because of his inability to escape the role as Superman. It really is enough to turn me against the movie and everyone who had a hand in making it. It honestly makes me happy that this movie lost the studio a buttload of money, because if this had been a success, I don't know what I would have done. Baby Cat is, well, I don't think I can even say it is a movie. This to-be original honestly feels like someone had an idea for a porn, but couldn't get anyone to perform in it, so instead they decided to make something a little bit more legitimate. Providing even screenshots from this movie will be tough, so let's just make this quick. It looks cheap, the camera work is abysmal, the acting is questionable at best, and the script seems like it went through the blender before being taped back together. Yet it's still not the worst of the year. Spider-Man Lotus is incredibly awful considering that this fan-made film was created by people in response to the MCU Spider-Man movies, supposedly missing the point of the character and his stories. All of the typical criticisms of this tier are here. Bad acting, poor camera work, terrible staging and lighting, and an overly long and poorly paced script. The worst sin this movie commits, though, is that the creators missed on the titular character in such a spectacular way. Peter Parker is angsty and consistently belittles his friends in this movie. He uses people as shields and then decides to trauma dump on a dying child. I would have put this movie in So Bad It's Good, but the fact that the people involved in making this have been revealed to be incredibly racist and groomers forces me to recommend that nobody supports this abomination by watching it. With that, we have gone through the entire Just Bad tier, which means we can move a step up to the movies that I had a great time watching, even though I cannot in all good faith say are good or even passable. From here on out, every movie we discuss will be in order from the bottom of my list to the top. Just barely missing out on the Just Bad tier is El Conde, a movie about an older vampire who just wants to die until he gets horny and meets a young nun. While the main concept of this story was intriguing enough for me to turn it on in the first place, I feel like there was just not enough done to justify the runtime of the movie. Instead of actually exploring the character motivations, the script devolves into left-field soap opera twists, including strange love triangles, betrayal, and long-lost relatives. By the end of the movie, I felt like I was on some sort of trip, especially when a well-known historical figure comes into the story and is revealed to be a vampire. This was a very strange experience, and even to this point, I go back and forth on whether I found the movie fun or boring. I guess since we already have a definitive bottom 10, this movie gets a lucky pass. Winnie the Pooh entered public domain, and it only took a matter of months for someone to snatch up that character and create a cheap slasher movie centered around him. Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey is in no way a good movie. The production value is so low that if we were ranking based on objective qualities, it would be at the bottom, just above Baby Cat and Spider-Man Lotus. Even with that, I simply cannot deny that I had a grand old time watching this movie. Pooh and Piglet, the slasher villains, had such little effort put into their costumes that it adds a specific charm to the movie, at least for someone like me. They are just two grown men running around in overalls and rubber masks. Watching Pooh try to eat honey through a mask with a mouth that is incapable of moving is oddly mesmerizing, and watching him do a quick turn with his classic Batman neck mobility is funny every time I see it. Supposedly, there's a sequel in the works, and you better believe that I will be there to see it once it comes out. Jackie Chan, John Cena. Put them together, and what do you get? Well, of course, you get Hidden Strike, which is absolute insanity. It is obvious that this movie is an attempt to gamify the Chinese box office by putting a bunch of low-effort special effects around some pretty solid fight choreography and relying on the sheer power behind the charisma of the two leads. Honestly, at first I was against John Cena when he started breaking into acting, but I think at this point it's hard to deny his impact on a movie. Meanwhile, Jackie Chan has proven time and time again that he can make almost any movie entertaining at a bare minimum. While the story makes little to no sense, this movie is a ton of mindless fun. In many ways, it feels pretty similar to a Fast and Furious movie. Speaking of which, Fast X is yet another movie full of nonsense, and I loved every second of it. Jason Momoa goes full ham in this movie, as does every big-name actor that comes into this franchise. Almost every person involved in these movies knows exactly what they are a part of. Charlize Theron, Brie Larson, John Cena, Helen Mirren, Jason Statham, everybody is having the time of their life just letting go. Everyone except for Vin Diesel, of course, who takes these movies so incredibly seriously, but it somehow adds to the charm. Despite what Diesel says, these movies are always terrible from a technical standpoint. Each entry finds a way to somehow one-up the nonsense from the previous movie. From completely off-the-wall set pieces to soap opera-level plot developments, this series has everything a fan of bad movies could ever want. That leaves us with our final list for the So Bad It's Good tier. For the next movie, I think I actually need to make a completely new tier because it really doesn't fit into anything else. So here, we are going to insert a new tier simply titled Beau, specifically for the movie Beau is Afraid. I honestly don't really know what to say about this weird movie. On one hand, there are some sequences that really work on their own as short pieces, but on the other hand, the individual segments of this movie really do not work together as a single narrative. Joaquin Phoenix does a great job in the lead role, or at least I think he does, but it's hard to tell because it's difficult to determine exactly what his journey is supposed to be. The script offers some great comedic moments mixed with some effective drama, or at least I think it does, because it's also sometimes difficult to tell which moments are supposed to be comedic and which ones are not. At the end of the day, I suppose I appreciate that Ari Aster was allowed to express his artistry and make a movie that is obviously so personal to him. It is easily the most unique movie I have seen this year, and I do wish more directors were allowed to take big swings like this, even if they don't always pay off, because it leads to more opportunities for discussion. We are now reaching the middle of the tier list, and some of the things I have to say about these movies might be a bit repetitive, so for the next few tiers, we are going to do a speed round. If you watched the last video, then you know the drill. A few sentences about each movie, and then we move on. Let's go. Disappointing tier. Chicken Run Dawn of the Nuggets, 20 years too late. It misses the tone of the original, and it relies too much on nostalgia and reusing jokes from the original. Good stop motion and animation though. About My Father. It's a comedy in which I never even chuckled. What a complete waste of Robert De Niro. No hard feelings. A really uncomfortable central premise makes it difficult to get behind the relationship between the two leads. There were a few good laughs, but it's not enough to distract from the grooming and manipulation present in the story. Old Dads. Bill Burr's brand of comedy does not land within the structure of this full-length movie. Character arcs never feel earned, and laughs are spread way too thin. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. It seems now like this will be the only actual appearance of Kang the Conqueror in the MCU, and that is truly upsetting since this movie was a complete waste of that character. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. A completely average adventure movie. Better than Crystal Skull, but nowhere near the original trilogy. What a completely underwhelming send-off for one of the most iconic characters of all time. Fool's Paradise. It's fine. Charlie Day's take on modern-day Charlie Chaplin is decent, but as a fan of Day, I expected a little bit more, so I guess that one's on me. Five Nights at Freddy's. Matthew Lillard is great as always, but this movie has a confusing tone. Why are the killer animatronics building forts with kids, and the lead characters are just okay with this? Leo. Hey, the new animated Adam Sandler movie just dropped. Dear God, why is it a musical? Sisu. Old Man Gets Revenge is one of my favorite subgenres of action movies. The action in this feels too slow to be engaging. John Wick, it is not. That does it for the disappointing tier, so now it's time to move on to the background noise movies. These movies are overall fine. I wouldn't turn them off if they were playing, but I don't see myself ever choosing to put them on personally. The Secret Kingdom. Cute, yet predictable kids' fantasy adventure. Child acting and cheap effects will be found here for sure. Your Place or Mine. It's an Ashton Kutcher rom-com. If you've seen one of them, then you know exactly what to expect out of this. Deadshot. It's a serviceable thriller. The movie drags on a little too long, and it doesn't really leave enough of an impact. Kandahar. Gerard Butler in the Middle East. This is one of those direct-to-Redbox action movies that exist just so that actors like Gerard Butler continue to get work. You Hurt My Feelings. It's a good performance from Julia Louis-Dreyfus, but the story is just not very compelling, and it's not even her best performance of the year. Extraction 2. I watched this movie, supposedly, but I don't remember a single thing about it. Happiness for Beginners. It's a cute little Netflix comedy. Ellie Kemper is fine here, a few chuckles make the time go by, but nothing really special. Tetris. It's a disjointed first half and a pretty good second half, with one of the absolute worst needle drops I have ever seen in a movie. Plane. Gerard Butler as a pilot who crashes a plane into a war zone. Gerard Butler and Mike Colter are fine in this movie. It's nice to see that they still get work. Jesus Revolution. Decent performances all around. Obviously, this one will appeal to a more religious crowd. Heck, they might even put it up a tier. Air. Viola Davis and Matt Damon are both great. I would not be surprised to see their names come up during the Oscar season. The movie is just a tad too long, but overall it was good. King of Killers. Stylized action with some questionable acting and pacing issues. They set up for a sequel that I would not be opposed to. Renfield. Nicolas Cage steals the show as he is obviously having the time of his life as Dracula. The rest is a mildly amusing comedic action movie. With that, we have gotten through the background noise tier. And looking back at it, I have to say that over the past decade, there is one actor that consistently finds his way into this tier. So I feel it's only right to rename the tier in his honor. This will now be known as the Gerard Butler tier. Next, I think I need to add another new tier for these three movies. They all revolve around subject matter that certain demographics may not be able to connect with on the same level, and therefore, even though I truly enjoyed them and I believe they are well made, I would not feel comfortable recommending them to just anyone. So let's create a new tier title, Uncomfortable Race Talks. You People. White boy Jonah Hill tries to date black girl Lauren London, and her father, Eddie Murphy, does not approve. This movie is extremely uncomfortable, as the families of the two leads try to connect with each other while overstepping and trying to make themselves blend in with a culture that they are not a part of. They cloned Tyrone. If you are unfamiliar with blaxploitation, then this might be a rough ride for you. John Boyega, Teyonah Parris, and Jamie Foxx are all terrific here. The commentary that this movie provides is outstanding, but if you are not familiar with black culture or the black experience, then this movie might not land with you. The Blackening. Such a funny movie, but much like that last movie, your mileage may vary based on how familiar you are with black culture or the black experience. Out of all three movies in this tier, I believe this to be the most accessible as a solid horror comedy. We have made it to the highly recommended movies. There are only 20 movies left in the list of what I have watched this year, so I guess this tier could also be considered numbers 20 through 11 of my top 20 movies of the year. So here we go. You are so not invited to my bat mitzvah. This is a solid coming-of-age teen comedy. The young Sandler girls, Sadie and Sunny, are young actors to keep an eye on. Both did well with the material provided here, and I'm excited to see what they do in the future. This movie also features one of the funniest line deliveries of the year. Even as someone who finds Adam Sandler to overstay his welcome in many of his projects, I have to admit that this movie won me over very easily. Run, Rabbit, Run. I don't want to say too much about this movie because I feel that for maximum impact, it's best to go in with no knowledge of what's happening. So let's just say this is a tense psychological thriller that was fun to watch. Now that I know what's going on, I'm actually excited to go back and rewatch with that knowledge to see how my perspective changes throughout the movie. The Deepest Breath. This documentary is to freediving what Free Solo was to rock climbing. There were times I caught myself holding my own breath while watching this. It's a look at how the obsession to be the best can be a deadly addiction. I was honestly surprised by how much I enjoyed this movie, but I would recommend it to anybody who has a fascination with sports or documentaries in general. Cocaine Bear. What a funny gore fest. The ending left a lot to be desired for me, but even so, the ride as a whole from start to finish was wild. The absurdity helps to heighten the gore effects, and the entire cast knows exactly what they are a part of. Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Chris Pine is such a great comedic leading man. This movie truly captures the fun and insanity that can come from a good session of the tabletop game that it's based on. While the movie barely broke even, I do hope they find some way to continue making projects and turning this into a series. We need more fun fantasy adventure movies like this one again. Barbie. I know, there are going to be people upset that this is down here, but hear me out. Overall, I really enjoyed this movie. The comedy mostly worked, and there were some very effective emotional moments. Greta Gerwig also managed to produce 2 of my favorite scenes of the year. I just feel like there must have been significant studio interference leading to the overall message of the movie getting confused. It seemed like there were plot threads leading up to some valid criticism, but at some point either Mattel or Warner, or perhaps both, stepped in and demanded changes to the script. I also feel like splitting the movie and having both Barbie and Ken as protagonists together led to a bloated script when each story could have been split into separate projects, which would have allowed the character arcs room to breathe. Having said all of that, I do understand and appreciate the need for representation, and even though it really boils down to introduction to feminism, I believe that these are ideas that are worth exploring. I also want to make it clear that if you were personally affected by this movie that I found flaws in, then that is completely valid. That's a part of the beauty of art, and I want to completely distance myself from the culture war that existed around this movie when it first came out. If you found depth and meaning in something that I did not, then I fully respect that. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Oof, hot take after hot take, am I right? I cannot deny that the animation in this movie is phenomenal. This movie is full of great references and fun gags. I also really love the themes and the story that the movie sets up. Unfortunately, this movie is a part 1 and lacks any real resolution, so it's difficult to consider it as a finished story. Even though we get a soft resolution for Miles' character arc, it seems obvious that the writers set up more for that arc in the next movie. I also take issue with the fact that there are different cuts of the movie that appeared in theater which are unavailable at home. Clue managed to do it, but they also included all of the different endings for the home distribution. As it stands, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse has multiple instances of scenes that are now lost media, and that is something I find unacceptable. In the end though, I still enjoyed the movie, and I am super excited to see the next one. Time to cause some controversy. The Super Mario Bros. Movie. Yes, I had more fun with this movie than I had with Spider-Man. The lack of depth in the story never bothered me like it supposedly bothered so many others, mainly because Mario media really boils down to Bowser steals Peach and Mario saves her. It's difficult for me to understand what else people were expecting from the Mario movie. The animation is clean, the voice acting is mostly fine, even though Fred Armisen as Cranky Kong was a real miss for me, and the humor was surprisingly decent. Very rarely do I have a movie that keeps a smile on my face for the entire runtime, but even with the unnecessary needle drops, I never felt that smile leave during my time in the theater. Maybe I just have a soft spot for Mario, which left me blind to a lot of the movie's failings. Oh well, I'll be in the seat opening night for the sequel either way. Polite Society. Remember Edgar Wright's Cornetto trilogy, in which he took a specific genre for each movie and spoofed that genre while also somehow creating classics within that same genre? This movie feels like Edgar Wright continued that trend and decided to take on martial arts, Bollywood, and coming-of-age teenage stories at the same time. What a pleasant surprise this movie was. There is a fantastic balance between humor and heart, and most of that comes from the great performance from the lead, Priya Kansara. I was completely on board with her, and I was fully invested in every emotion she had throughout the movie. This is one of those movies that I would say everyone should watch, because it's just so easy to fall in love with it. John Wick Chapter 4. The modern king of action movies, Keanu Reeves, returns as John Wick, and it is yet another phenomenal entry into this series. I will say that nothing has ever surpassed the first movie, but every movie in the series has been better than a majority of all other action movies in the past few decades. This one's no exception, but I will admit that when the writers introduced the bulletproof suits, it made the choreographers just a little bit lazy. While the fights are still great, there is an over-reliance on the characters just blocking bullets with clothing. It makes the scenes much less exciting to know that the characters can be shot and simply get back up. World building has always been one of the strongest parts of the John Wick series, and I love what they added in this one. I just hope they don't stretch this too thin. With Chapter 4, I think they have officially reached a fitting end for the main story, and if there are any further movies, I hope they instead do spin-offs and focus on a new character. And there you have it, the highly recommended tier. We have finally reached my top 10 movies of the year. In no particular order, they are Wrath of Becky, Suzume, Somewhere in Queens, Past Lives, Oppenheimer, Nimona, Leave the World Behind, Godzilla -1, Asteroid City, and Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. We won't be officially ranking these today, as I really want to take my time and fully explain why I loved these movies so much. So instead, there will be a top 10 video next week to cover these. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. Be sure to come back later this week when I go through all of the video games I played in 2023, and then look forward to next week when I will upload videos covering my absolute favorite TV shows, movies, and games from the past year. Until then, thanks for watching.